Welcome to another episode where we dive deep into the lives that shaped our world with the story of us by Skoob. I'm your host, Madison Reed, and today we're journeying back 8 centuries to explore one of history's most enigmatic and transformative figures, a man whose very name still sends shivers down the spine of history. This is the story of Temüjin, the boy who would become Genghis Khan, the great Khan of the Mongols. Imagine trying to piece together the life of someone whose people had no written language, whose story was passed down through songs and oral traditions for generations before anyone bothered to write it down. That's the challenge we face with Genghis Khan. The man who created the largest contiguous land empire in human history left behind no autobiography, no official records, no stone monuments proclaiming his deeds. But before we begin, let me set something straight. Almost everything you think you know about this man might be wrong. The Mongols were primarily an oral culture, lacking a written language, which left us with a fragmented historical record. Much of what we know comes from the secret history of the Mongols, written in the mid-13th century, using a script borrowed from the Uyghur Turks. But no original copies remain. We're working with Chinese translations that experts believe were influenced by political agendas to benefit the ruling Mongol elite. Add to this the fact that most written accounts come from Chinese and Persian scholars, people whose lands were under Mongol threat or conquest, and you get a picture painted by those who had every reason to demonize their conquerors. It's like trying to understand Abraham Lincoln through the writings of Confederate generals, or learning about Julius Caesar exclusively from Gallic chieftains. The bias is built into the very sources we rely on. Yet despite these complications, certain elements of Genghis Khan's story shine through with startling clarity. This is that story. Picture this. The year is around 1160 AD. Across the northeastern steppes of what we now call Mongolia, a young woman of notable beauty named Hoilin travels in a modest black cart pulled by an ox. She's married to Chiledu, a warrior of the Merkit tribe, and they're crossing this vast landscape of expansive grasslands bordered by forests, deserts, and lakes. Near one of those lakes, a man named Yesuge, chief of the rival Taichiud tribe, is fishing. He sees Holun, and in that moment, her fate is sealed. Captivated by her beauty, Yesuge decides to abduct her, a customary practice of the period that sounds barbaric to our modern ears, but was simply how things were done on the steppes. Enlisting his brothers, Yesuge ambushes the caravan and captures Hoilin. This wasn't romance. This was conquest, pure and simple. And from this forced union, Hoilin would bear a son named Temüjin, a name derived from one of Yesuge's vanquished enemies. That child would grow up to become the man we know as Genghis Khan. Think about that origin story for a moment. The future conqueror of the world was born from an act of violence, named after a defeated enemy. If you're looking for foreshadowing in history, you've found it. Fast forward 9 years. Young Temüjin is traveling with his father, Yesuge, to his mother's native tribe, renowned for the beauty of their women. Yesuge has business here. He's arranging his son's future. He betroths 9-year-old Temüjin to a 10-year-old girl named Berte, with plans for marriage when they reach maturity. Temüjin stays with Berte's family for a year to get acquainted, a perfectly normal arrangement for the time. But on Yesuge's journey home, fate intervenes in the cruelest way possible. He encounters 4 men from the rival Tatar tribe, people he'd fought before. The Tatars were ancient enemies, groups who had clashed over grazing rights, water sources, and honor for generations. Blood feuds on the steppes could last decades, passed down from father to son like inherited weapons. Now, here's where the story gets tragic. Yesuge, perhaps trying to show strength, or maybe just being diplomatic, accepts their hospitality. In steppe culture, refusing hospitality was a grave insult, but accepting it from enemies was incredibly dangerous. He shares a meal with them, participating in the sacred ritual of breaking bread together. It's the last mistake he'll ever make. The Tatars poison him, a coward's weapon that violated every code of honor the nomads held sacred. By the time Yesuge reaches home, He's gravely ill, and soon he's dead. Just like that, young Temüjin's world collapses. When Hoelun summons her son home, Temüjin returns to find everything changed. His father, the man he idolized, is gone. And worse, despite Yasuge's standing within the Taichud tribe, the tribal leaders decide his family is now a burden. They abandon them. Picture this: a widow with children, cast out into one of the harshest environments on Earth. The Mongolian steppes are unforgiving, vast grasslands that stretch to the horizon, where the nearest neighbor might be days away and survival depends entirely on knowing where to find water, which plants are edible, and how to read the weather in the endless sky above. They're forced to live in near-constant exile, fending for themselves without the security that comes with tribal membership. They survive by foraging for wild plants and roots, boiling millet when they can find it, catching fish with improvised nets, and hunting small game with whatever weapons they can fashion. The seasonal extremes are brutal: winter temperatures plunging to -40 degrees, where exposed skin freezes in minutes, summer heat that's suffocating, spring floods that turn the land into an impassable marsh, and autumn storms that can kill the unprepared. This is where Genghis Khan was really born, not in his mother's womb, but in this crucible of abandonment and survival. Every day was a lesson in resourcefulness, every night a test of endurance. The turning point comes when 13-year-old Temüjin discovers that his older half-brother is hoarding food. In a family living on the edge of starvation, this isn't just selfishness, it's a death sentence for the others. Overcome with fury, Temüjin kills him with a well-aimed arrow. Let that sink in. A 13-year-old boy commits fratricide over food. His own mother, Hoelun, cries out in despair, "Destroyer! Destroyer!" Like an unwieldy lion, a monstrous beast consuming its prey alive. But here's what's fascinating. This moment of violence doesn't break Temüjin. It reveals him. It shows the world what he's capable of when pushed to the edge. And the Taichud tribe leaders, who had dismissed this family as harmless, suddenly take notice. This audacious and aggressive young man starts forming alliances with fellow outcasts, individuals marginalized from minor tribes, bandits, adventurers. The tribal leaders begin to worry. What if this dangerous boy unites these people? What if he comes back for revenge against those who abandoned his family? Their fears are well-founded. When they finally capture Temüjin and bind him with a wooden collar that makes any movement excruciating, they think they've solved their problem. He languishes in captivity for several years. They're wrong. Temüjin escapes. Now 16 and free, Temüjin has unfinished business. He seeks out Berta to fulfill their marriage agreement. Her father gives him a sable coat as dowry, a valuable gift that Temüjin immediately recognizes as an opportunity. He presents the coat to Ong Khan, an ally of his late father and chief of the Karayid tribe. In gratitude, Ong Khan vows to aid Temüjin whenever called upon. It's a smart political move, and Temüjin will need that alliance sooner than he thinks. Shortly after Temüjin and Borti marry, she's abducted by the Merkit tribe. The irony is palpable. Temüjin's own mother had been kidnapped by his father from this same tribe. Now the Merkits have taken his wife, perhaps as revenge. For 3 harrowing days, Temüjin prays to the only deity he knows, the eternal blue sky. Unlike other tribes turning to Buddhism, Islam, or Christianity, Temüjin practices animist beliefs in nature's spirits. His faith inspires him to action. He rallies with Ong Khan, who brings allied tribes to their cause. Together, they mount an attack against the Merkits. This is Temüjin's first real victory, and he rescues Berta. But victory comes with a price. Berta returns pregnant, and the paternity is uncertain. She was mistreated by her abductors during captivity. In a lesser man, this might have destroyed their marriage. But their bond endures, marking not just a personal triumph, but the beginning of Temüjin's rise to power. This is where the legend of Genghis Khan truly begins. By 1219, the boy who once foraged for roots has become Genghis Khan, leading a formidable Mongol army into the Khwarezmian Empire in what is now eastern Iran. The transformation is staggering, but what's even more impressive is how the Mongols evolved their military tactics. Initially, they were nomadic cavalry, swift, mobile, devastating in open terrain. Picture waves of horsemen appearing on the horizon like a storm front, each warrior managing multiple horses, able to travel hundreds of miles, while enemy armies were still breaking camp. Their composite bows could accurately hit targets at distances that amazed their enemies, and their feigned retreats were so convincing that pursuing armies would find themselves scattered and vulnerable, perfect targets for the inevitable counterattack. But as they encountered fortified cities, they adapted with frightening efficiency. The key was their integration of a permanent corps of Chinese engineers. This specialized group managed prisoners of war, instructing them in siege warfare, digging extensive tunnels that could collapse entire sections of walls, redirecting rivers to flood cities or cut off their water supply, constructing massive catapults that could hurl stones weighing hundreds of pounds, building battering rams reinforced with iron, and siege towers that could roll right up to enemy walls. They even employed innovative techniques like detonating burning gunpowder on besieged forces, an early form of explosive warfare that terrorized defenders who had never seen anything like it. Giovanni da Pian del Carpine, a European at a Mongol court, described how these engineers continually refined their methods, experimenting with different projectiles and combustible materials. One particularly gruesome tactic involved melted human fat to create nearly inextinguishable fires when launched onto enemy dwellings, a psychological weapon as much as a practical one. The conquest of Baghdad in 1258 showcases their evolved capabilities perfectly. Baghdad was the bustling hub of Islamic wealth and culture, protected by massive walls that had withstood sieges for centuries. But Mongol catapults targeted a single defensive tower and reduced it to rubble in just 3 days. The precision was surgical, the destruction absolute. The Mongols mocked Baghdad's ruler for stockpiling wealth rather than investing in defenses, then executed him by rolling him in a carpet and trampling him, effectively ending the caliphate that had ruled the Islamic world for over 600 years. But perhaps their most impressive siege was Xiangyang in 1267, one of the most formidable bastions on earth and crucial for controlling China. This wasn't just any fortress. It was considered virtually impregnable, protected by both natural geography and human engineering. Despite 6 years of unsuccessful attacks, the Mongols adapted again, transitioning from cavalry to naval forces. They vanquished the Chinese fleet on the Han River and used newly designed catapults to breach the walls of Fancheng, the fortress guarding Xiangyang. With Fancheng's fall, Xiangyang's defeat became inevitable, allowing Kublai Khan to chase the Song dynasty emperor into the sea by 1279. In open battle, nomadic armies proved just as adaptable. For instance, in 1191, the steppe cavalry of the Ghurid Empire initially fled in chaos when facing elephants in the Indian subcontinent. These massive war beasts, armored and carrying towers full of archers, had never been encountered by the nomads before. But the following year, the same commander executed a strategic shift, exploiting a different tactic against the Ganges Valley Alliance at the Battle of Touraine. Deploying 4 formations of horse archers, each 10,000 strong, they executed hit-and-run tactics, minimizing engagement with the imposing elephants while gradually wearing down the infantry. As dusk fell, a reserve of 12,000 heavily armored lancers charged, decisively breaking the Indian lines. Here's where the story gets really interesting, because while we remember Genghis Khan for conquest and destruction, his lasting legacy is something entirely different: the Pax Mongolica, a period of relative stability that followed the rapid expansions. Think about this. At its height, the Mongol Empire stretched from Eastern Europe to the Pacific Ocean, from Siberia to Southeast Asia and the Indian subcontinent. A single political entity controlled roughly 22% of the total land area of the Earth. To put that in perspective, it was 4 times larger than the Roman Empire at its peak and twice the size of the Russian Empire. Managing something this vast required more than just military might. It demanded innovation on a scale the world had never seen. The Mongols weren't just destroyers, they were builders of systems. They established administrative networks characterized by remarkable scale and efficiency, adapting and expanding upon existing systems they encountered rather than simply imposing their own nomadic ways. They implemented an extensive postal and communications network called the YAM, an adaptation of the Chinese WE system, facilitated by Uyghur and Khitan advisors who held substantial influence at the Mongol court. This postal system was revolutionary. Imagine being able to send a message from Paris to Beijing and having it delivered faster than would be possible again until the invention of the telegraph. The YAM used relay stations positioned at regular intervals across the empire, with fresh horses and riders ready at each stop. Official correspondence could travel at speeds of up to 200 miles per day, astounding for the 13th century. But here's what's truly remarkable. Contrary to their reputation as purely ruthless conquerors, their strategy involved integrating local elites into their administration. This wasn't just pragmatic, it was revolutionary. Rather than replacing existing power structures entirely, they co-opted them. Chinese bureaucrats continued to run Chinese territories using Chinese methods. Persian administrators managed Persian regions, and so on. The Mongols positioned themselves as a ruling layer above these systems, extracting tribute and maintaining order, but allowing local customs and laws to continue. They created what they called a bridge of justice across their lands to ensure prosperity. This wasn't empty rhetoric. They genuinely believed that a prosperous empire was a stable empire. Trade routes that had been disrupted by warfare for centuries were reopened and protected. Merchants traveling the Silk Road carried not just goods, but ideas, technologies, and innovations that spread across continents. The Mongols were instrumental in urban development, constructing cities like Karakorum, founded in 1220, which received substantial investments over subsequent years, including resplendent palatial structures that amazed visitors from across the known world. They established new towns along major rivers of Central Asia and the coastlines of the Black Sea and Sea of Azov. Under their reign, commerce flourished across Eurasia in ways that wouldn't be seen again until the modern era. Religious tolerance was another cornerstone of Mongol administration. While Genghis Khan himself worshipped the eternal blue sky and the spirits of nature, his empire included Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, Confucians, and followers of countless local traditions. Rather than forcing conversion, the Mongols often exempted religious institutions from taxation and protected holy sites. They were more interested in political submission than spiritual conformity. This matters because while scientists have suggested that Mongol invasions had profound ecological impacts by reducing human populations, some claiming it affected global carbon cycles, mounting evidence indicates that many areas they conquered were already undergoing significant urban and demographic decline due to ecological stressors like prolonged aridity. The territories the Mongols acquired were often in decline rather than representing magnificent, flourishing civilizations. They may have been capitalizing on pre-existing weakness rather than destroying thriving societies. But let's not romanticize this. The human cost was staggering. The figures reported by surviving chroniclers are almost incomprehensible. 1,747,000 victims, plus all pets killed at Nishapur, according to one Persian historian, 2,400,000 at Herat, according to another account. These numbers are likely exaggerated when compared to probable population sizes of the cities at the time, but the severe impact is undeniable. Every time the horsemen of the steppes pushed into fertile heartlands, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, perished. Genghis Khan's campaigns resulted in tens of millions of deaths. The ultimate secret of nomadic power was logistics. By the 13th century, nomads could efficiently raise and sustain armies exceeding 50,000 cavalry, with individual warriors managing multiple spare horses. When these forces concentrated, sometimes hundreds of thousands of horses in tight spaces. It required meticulous organization, managed by substantial staffs, frequently composed of captives from conquered cities. When Tamerlane led a renewed Mongol onslaught around 1400, sacking cities like Delhi and Damascus, his toll of destruction paralleled Genghis Khan's. Had he not died of illness in 1405 while preparing to march against China, history might have been even bloodier. So who was Genghis Khan really? A monster? A visionary? A product of his brutal times? He was both destroyer and builder, a man whose legacy shaped continents and whose shadow still touches our DNA. Genghis Khan didn't just conquer the world, he rewired it. Imagine this: 1 in 200 men alive today may descend from him. His empire sparked the first real globalization, linking cultures, spreading technologies, and laying the groundwork for the modern world. But it came at a brutal cost. Entire cities vanished. Civilizations were silenced. So how do we reconcile a legacy built on both innovation and annihilation? The full story is more complex and more relevant to today's global tensions than you might expect. Download the Skoob app now to dive deeper into the rise of Genghis Khan and uncover what his life really tells us about power, progress, and the price of empire. This is your host, Madison Reed, with The Story of Us by Skoob. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one of history's most complex and fascinating lives. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and remember, the past is never quite what it seems, and the most important stories are often the most complicated ones.